So before I start, I gotta give a disclaimer that I obviously won't be going over all the characters in this world, or even half of the main characters. There's a shit ton of characters in the show, and thousands in the books, so I'll just be comparing the character sizes that I find interesting to talk about. I guess I should start with the shorter characters. We don't get an exact height on Tyrion Lannister, but since Tyrion is a little person, referred to as a dwarf in this series, he's probably around 3.5 feet tall. Dwarves don't have it easy in this world. They're given very little respect and have very little future opportunities. The wildlings and Dothraki don't even bother letting a baby with this disability live. The children of the forest are about a foot taller. We get a gauge of their size when Bran first comes across one beyond the wall. He compares them to his sister Arya, who is your average small 9-year-old girl, so definitely under 5 foot tall, maybe 4.5 feet tall. Since Bran's comparing the children of the forest to Arya at the beginning of the story, she's clearly grown a few inches since then. Bran is also responsible for giving us some insight on how large the direwolves have grown. Direwolves were once actually animals in our real world, but nowhere near as big as they are in this series. They're apparently slightly larger than the pony he had back at Winterfell, and since ponies are just under 5 foot tall, I'm putting the Stark's direwolves at 5 foot flat. A lot of Peter Baelish's character is based on his size. He was small even as a child, and was given the nickname Littlefinger by Edmure Tully. This name gets extra meaning when you learn that House Baelish is from the smallest peninsula from the region called the Fingers in the Vale. He grew with the Tully children and has always been in love with Cat. When he found out that she was betrothed to Brandon Stark, he challenged him to a duel for her. Peter may be short now, maybe 5'6", but he was even smaller then. And Brandon was a larger man, taller and more muscular than his younger brothers Ned and Benjen. I would guess he was around 6'3". He also loved to fight and was good at it, so Peter didn't stand a chance. Cat had to beg Brandon to spare him, even though he wouldn't give up. So Brandon just left him with one last serious injury with his blade, so he would just stay down. Peter was forced to leave House Tully's home of Riverrun after he healed. This was a huge learning moment for his character. He now understood that fighting was not how he was going to win any battles. Now let's get into the taller characters, where it gets a lot more fun. Brienne's character also has a lot to do with her size. I'm pretty sure she's the tallest girl in the series, and she's been mocked her whole life because of it. Her being described as unattractive didn't help things either. Most noble girls dream of finding a suitable match for marriage, but Brienne was always more interested in knighthood. As much as her father tried, he couldn't even find a suitor for her, even if she was interested. When asked about her height, George Martin came out and said she's well over 6 feet tall, but not close to 7. He said she's taller than Renly and Jaime, who are both considered tall, and he finished by saying maybe roughly the same size as Robert Baratheon, who's 6'6". Brienne was only recently confirmed by George Martin to be a descendant of Duncan the Tall. It was hinted at for a while, but it was cool to get some clarification. Duncan, who was a hedge knight, is the main character in the Duncan Egg short stories that come out once in a while. He would grow up to be one of the 7 Kingdoms' most famous knights and a Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. Maester Aemon Targaryen measured him at 6'11", and where his backstory gets more juicy is George Martin says there are 3 more characters in the books that descend from him. One of them is clearly Hodor. The next Duncan Egg short story is supposed to take place in Winterfell, and when Bran uses his green sight to enter the weirwood at his home, he sees a young old Nan kissing a tall knight. Old Nan would be around the same age as Duncan, and she's Hodor's great-grandmother. If you don't remember her, she's that old woman who tells the Stark kids all those scary stories that Bran loves.
I could tell you about Sir Duncan the Tall. Those were always your favourites.
Those weren't my favourites. My favourites were the scary ones.
Hodor is massive, being over 7 feet tall, and that's still not the tallest man in Westeros. Gregor Clegane, aka the Mountain, is close to 8 feet tall. Not only is he tall, but he's also muscular and cruel with a short temper, so a really terrifying person everyone should avoid, unless you're a Lannister. He was always an obedient bannerman to his liege lord. His younger brother, the Hound, used to be loyal, but things changed in the recent story. Sandor Clegane is also insanely large, but nowhere near his brother's size. He's only 6'8". There is a race of people way out east on the island Lang, where people this tall are very common. The Langyi are the tallest race in the known world, growing up to 8 feet tall. They also have larger eyes, giving them the best vision on top of being the tallest. Any taller than this and you're in giant-sized territory. There once was a race called the Mazemakers in Lorath, which is the northwestern part of Essos, who were said to be huge. So big that some believe they were half giant, but that's all we know about them. The giants in this story aren't really all that tall, compared to some other fiction. They're anywhere from 10 to 14 feet tall, and even Jon Snow expected them to be larger. They ride around on mammoths, which are probably as tall as they are. The giants that once roamed Essos, however, are enormous. Their bones that are scattered around the continent show that they were twice the size of the giants of Westeros. In Essos, these larger giants are called the Jogwin. Ironically enough, they were exterminated by one of the shortest races in Essos, a people called the Jogos Nahai. They are very similar to the Dothraki in their way of life, but with some major differences when it comes to their physical appearance. The Jogos Nahai are a head shorter than the Dothraki. They shape their heads to a point by binding it at a very young age. The only other people that might be shorter are the people of Ib. The Ebonnese are pretty much like dwarves in other fantasies like Lord of the Rings. 5.5 feet is their max height, and they are large with broad shoulders and a broad chest. They are extremely hairy and have short legs with larger arms. They live in the northern region of Essos and are not welcoming of outsiders. This makes more sense when you find out that they can't really mate with other races. Their children turn out as stillborn or with deformities. This led people to look at the Ebonnese as a completely different species outside of humans. There are a bunch of fantastical beasts in this series, like wyverns, giant apes, or monster-like turtles called Old Man of the River, but the species that gets the most detailing and attention is obviously the dragons. Dragons are a little tricky in size, since they grow forever, as long as they're not in captivity and continue to eat as much as they want. The largest known dragon was Balerion the Black Dread, who belonged to Aegon the Conqueror 300 years before the start of the series. I'm sure there were larger dragons before this point, but all their history was destroyed along with the dragon's home of Valyria during the Doom 400 years ago. Dragons also live a very long life. Balerion lived for 200 years, so not only was he the largest, but also the oldest. After growing for 200 years, Balerion might be the largest living thing in this story. He was so big that he could eat a mammoth whole, and cover a town in its shadow while it flew overhead. I think Balerion would have to be at least 200 feet long to accomplish this. The last of the Targaryen dragons were nothing like Balerion, however. They were all born ill and lived a very short life, only growing to be the size of a dog. But Daenerys' dragons are growing and healthy, especially her bonded dragon, Drogon. We know that Drogon's wingspan is 20 feet wide, so I guess his height could be around there also, and he's only going to get larger. I don't want to talk about structure sizes too much in this video, but I think I might as well mention some of the larger iconic buildings. The wall is actually extremely tall. Its highest point is 700 feet high. That's a crazy amount of work to build, since it also runs for 300 miles. Something that would only make sense in a fantasy world. The high tower in Old Town that served as a lighthouse, and the Great Pyramid in Meereen, where Daenerys was staring, is even taller, reaching 800 feet. I know I'm going to be reading a bunch of comments about which characters I didn't include, but there's only so many people I can fit on a screen. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this one, guys. I'll see y'all later, and thanks for watching.